I grew up in Portland, Maine, with a brother named Tommy who seemed larger than life itself. He had this way of moving through the world that made everything look easy, the kind of natural charisma that turned strangers into friends and made impossible things seem inevitable. By his senior year, college scouts were already circling our high school football games like vultures, notebooks open, pens scratching. Tommy could have written his own ticket to any university in the country. But Tommy didn't want a scholarship. He wanted to fly helicopters in Vietnam, and in 1964, that's exactly what he did. The telegram came on a Tuesday. Tommy had taken a bullet somewhere over the jungle canopy, managed to pilot his damaged bird back to base, and even set it down before losing consciousness. The surgeons tried. God knows they tried. But some wounds are too deep, some bleeding too persistent. We lost him on the operating table halfway around the world, and a part of my family died with him. I was 13 years old, and the grief nearly destroyed us. My mother stopped cooking, my father stopped speaking. Our house became a mausoleum where 3 people moved like ghosts through rooms that still smelled like Tommy's cologne and the leather of his football gloves. It took 5 years before we could even pretend to be a family again, before we could sit at the dinner table without that 4th chair screaming its emptiness at us. And then, just as we were beginning to breathe again, the draft happened. I was 18, unemployed, and precisely the kind of young man the government wanted to feed into the same meat grinder that had devoured my brother. When my parents realized I was eligible, something broke inside them all over again. My mother developed this look in her eyes, distant and glassy, as if she could already see my name on a second telegram. My father started drinking before noon. Neither of them said it out loud, but I could feel their terror pressing against me like a physical weight, the unbearable thought of losing another son to that God-forsaken war. Unlike Tommy, though, I had an escape route. My mother had an old friend whose brother worked in the church. With the right connections, the right strings pulled in the right offices, I could secure a scholarship to the University of Maine. Seminary students were exempt from the draft. All I had to do was commit to studying for the priesthood, and Vietnam would disappear from my future entirely. The plan was simple. I'd enroll, avoid the draft, and quietly withdraw once the war ended and the conscription stopped, a temporary deception in service of survival. But something unexpected happened in those dusty classrooms and quiet chapels. Studying scripture didn't feel like hiding, it felt like healing. The Bible gave me back something I'd lost when Tommy died, some fundamental sense that the world made sense, that there was meaning beneath the chaos and cruelty. Faith became medicine for a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding.
So when it came time to leave, I stayed. For me, religion was never about judgment or righteousness. It was about service. To God, yes, but more importantly, to my fellow human beings. I sought out every opportunity to volunteer, to work with charitable organizations, to go wherever I might be needed most. That's how I ended up in Appalachia in the spring of 1977. The Schoolhouse Project was a relatively new initiative started by the Maine Council of Churches to provide Sunday school services to children in underserved communities. They had chapters in Florida, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, but they wanted to expand into Virginia. Someone recommended me to spearhead the effort, and I accepted immediately, honored to be trusted with something so important. I need to pause here and offer an apology. I made a promise to someone years ago that if I ever told this story, I would protect the identities of the innocent, those who remain, those who are still living with the aftermath of what happened. So I'm going to use false names and obscure certain details. The town I'm about to describe exists, but I'm going to call it Ashby. The people were real, but their names have been changed. Some truths are too dangerous to speak plainly. Ashby sat in the hollers of Appalachian, Virginia, right where Kentucky and the 2 Virginias come together in a knot of mountains and valleys. For those unfamiliar with the term, A holler is a small valley carved between hills. Arterial would be the word I'd use to describe them. Within a 5-mile radius, there might be 15 or 20 of these hidden valleys, tucked away from the main roads where the small towns cluster. When I arrived in Ashby in 1977, coal was king. The oil crisis of the mid-70s had made American coal valuable again, and the mines were hiring. People were flooding into Ashby by the dozen, desperate for work, dragging their families behind them. The town's 2 churches were handling the influx well enough, but there weren't enough Sunday school teachers for all the children who suddenly needed them. That's where I came in. I rented a room in a boarding house on the edge of town and introduced myself to the local preachers. Once they gave their blessing, I assembled a modest setup, a large tent, some folding chairs, a chalkboard. I expected it would take weeks, maybe months, to build up an actual congregation of children. But that first Sunday, my tent was packed. The kids loved the Bible stories, especially Jonah and the whale, the tale of redemption from the belly of darkness. The parents seemed grateful just to have somewhere safe to leave their children for an hour each week. By the second Sunday, families were bringing their own chairs, whatever they could find: lawn furniture, old folding chairs, plastic crates. The Virginia chapter of the Schoolhouse Project became a genuine success.
Ashby was poor, there was no denying that, but the people had a richness of spirit that humbled me. Through teaching their children, I got to know almost everyone in town. Some parents genuinely wanted their kids to learn scripture. Others, I suspected, just wanted someone to watch them for an hour while they nursed their hangovers in peace. The mother of a boy named Joshua fell firmly into that second category. She never showed much interest in talking to me when she came to collect him on Sunday mornings. She'd nod, offer a tight smile, and hurry Joshua away. She was thin in that way that speaks of hardship rather than health, with hollow eyes that never quite focused on anything. But she always came to pick him up, always on time, and Joshua seemed clean and fed, so I didn't pry. When Joshua missed 2 consecutive Sundays, though, I started to worry. I called his mother's trailer, a small unit on the edge of town, and was relieved when she answered. Joshua had just been sick, she explained. Under the weather, nothing serious. She'd bring him back next week. And she did. But when I saw Joshua again, something was wrong. He'd always been a pale child, quiet and withdrawn, but now he looked almost translucent. His skin had a grayish quality that made me think of newspaper left out in the rain. He moved slowly, carefully, as if he wasn't entirely certain his legs would support him. That Sunday, I had the children draw pictures of animals they thought would have been on Noah's Ark. While they worked with their crayons, I pulled Joshua aside and asked him how he was feeling. He was 7, maybe 8 years old, a small child with large eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze directly. "I was sick," he said, studying his shoes, "but I'm better now." "What kind of sick? Like a cold or a stomach bug?" "I don't know," Joshua said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "It just made me sleepy, really, really sleepy, and then I got better." That seemed normal enough. Children got sick all the time. But before I could send him back to his seat, Joshua said something that made the temperature in the tent seem to drop. "I had a dream while I was sick," he said. "Want to hear about it?" I smiled. "Of course." "I dreamed I was walking through underpants trees." The phrase was so absurd, so unexpected, that I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "Underpants trees?" Joshua nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, pleased to have amused me. "Yeah, trees with underpants hanging from all the branches, different colors." "That's quite an imagination you've got there, Josh." "And then these make-do dolls came out from behind the trees, big ones. They wanted to play with me."
For those unfamiliar with Appalachian traditions, make-do dolls are exactly what they sound like. Dolls you make do with, cobbled together from scraps and old materials. Scottish and English immigrants brought the tradition over in the 1800s. Most make-do dolls are just cloth sacks stuffed with rags, with faces stitched onto the fabric. Crude, simple things. In my mind, I pictured these cheerful, lumpy sack people with button eyes and stitched-on grins. "That sounds like a fun dream," I said. I bet getting sick wouldn't be so bad if you had dreams like that every time." "That's what I thought," Joshua said, but his small smile had faded. "Except after the dream, I felt even worse, and I slept for a really long time before I finally got better." "Well, I'm glad you're feeling better now." Joshua nodded, but he didn't move to return to his seat. Instead, he looked up at me with those large, serious eyes and said something that turned my blood to ice. "Next time I get so sick I fall down, I hope I don't have to sleep in the woods again." I don't know how I finished that Sunday school session. Somehow, I managed to keep teaching, to smile and nod when parents came to collect their children, to maintain the appearance of normalcy. But when Joshua's mother arrived, gaunt and hollow-eyed and eager to leave, I found I couldn't look at her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Joshua's pale face, hearing his small voice. "Next time I get so sick I fall down, I hope I don't have to sleep in the woods again." The next morning, I called the county sheriff's office. A few hours later, a young deputy arrived at my boarding house. I'll call him Isaac. He was in his late 20s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd grown up hard and expected to die the same way. I laid out everything Joshua had told me, the sickness, the strange dream, and especially that final, terrible comment about sleeping in the woods. Isaac listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'll make sure the boy's being taken care of," he said finally. "But I need you to understand something about Appalachia. Taken care of is a relative term around here. People work themselves half to death just to keep food on the table. Even the good ones don't have time to watch their kids 24/7. If we filed neglect charges on every parent who let their kid wander into the hollers unsupervised, we'd have half the county in court." "I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble," I said. "I just want to make sure Joshua is safe." "I'll talk to his mother," Isaac said. "Give her a warning. But people don't change overnight, especially when their grocery runs look like they came from a distillery." He called me back a few days later. "The situation was better than I'd feared," he said. Yes, Joshua had collapsed in the woods, likely from dehydration or exhaustion related to his illness. But his mother had found him before dark after a frantic search and brought him home to recover. I felt such relief. I hadn't wanted to cause problems. I just wanted to ensure a child was safe. Joshua didn't miss any more Sundays after that. He didn't mention any more strange dreams. I allowed myself to believe the crisis had passed. 6 weeks went by peacefully. I began to feel a genuine sadness about my eventual departure. Ashby had gotten under my skin. Some people might find the town boring, but I'd come to appreciate its quiet rhythms, its simple routines. Very little happened in Ashby, which meant that when something did happen, it became the talk of the entire town. I remember stopping by the grocery store one afternoon. The clerk, I'll call him Chad, greeted me with barely contained excitement. "Hey, Pastor, did you hear about the fire up in Godby Holler?" I hadn't. Chad was happy to fill me in. Godby Holler, he explained, was an abandoned plague town dating back to just after the Civil War. When disease struck, the authorities had nailed entire families inside their homes to prevent the contagion from spreading. Scores of people had died screaming in the darkness, clawing at their sealed doors. Eventually, someone tried to burn the whole settlement down, but the job was incomplete. Some structures still stood, hidden deep in the overgrowth. The holler was so choked with vegetation now that you'd have to be a fool to go in there, Chad said. Snakes everywhere. But even if the path was clear, people would still avoid Godby Holler because it was haunted. Chad had already heard theories that the fire was supernatural in origin, the restless dead trying to finish purifying their cursed ground. I suggested a more mundane explanation: teenagers and cigarettes. The fire had burned all night before being extinguished at dawn. The town treated it as an isolated incident. But it wasn't isolated. It was the first domino falling in a chain of events that would destroy everything. 6 weeks before I was scheduled to return to Maine, 3 of Ashby's residents vanished overnight. The first was a man who owned a small trucking business. I'll call him the trucker. The second was a supervisor at one of the county's sawmills, the logger. Both were respectable members of the community with no criminal records, well-liked and stable. The third man was different. I'll call him the brother for reasons that will become clear. He was a deadbeat alcoholic who lived in a deteriorating trailer in the same park where Joshua and his mother lived. He had a long criminal record: petty theft, assault, public intoxication. He was everything the first two men weren't: violent, unreliable, constantly in trouble with the law. And he was Deputy Isaac's brother. When I learned this, I felt a wave of sympathy for Isaac. His brother had finally gone too far, I assumed, got himself into serious trouble and dragged two innocent men down with him. The three men barely knew each other. They left no notes, no explanations. Given the brothers' history, most people assumed the disappearances were criminal in nature. Maybe the brother had killed the other two during some kind of altercation. Maybe a drug deal had gone bad. The men didn't come back. As days turned into weeks, the town's mood darkened. People made posters, organized search parties, walked through the woods calling the missing men's names. But the forests around Ashby are vast and unforgiving. The searchers found nothing. Eventually, the search parties dwindled. Hope began to die. That's when the vigils started. People would walk through the streets at night carrying candles, their faces solemn, praying silently for the men's return. I attended every vigil, my heart breaking for the community's pain. Deputy Isaac was always there too, a terrible grief carved into his features. I assumed his law enforcement experience had robbed him of optimism, that he'd seen too many bodies to believe in happy endings. I approached him once, offered to talk, but he declined. A week after the last vigil, one of Ashby's churches erected a hope tree. It was a simple thing, cardboard cut into the shape of an evergreen, with photos of the three missing men attached to it. Flowers and candles surrounded its base. People wrote notes expressing their prayers and taped them to the branches. The preacher gave a sermon about how their hope, like God's love, was evergreen. Then someone broke into the church in the middle of the night and destroyed it. The violence of the destruction shocked the community to its core. This was Ashby. People didn't do things like that here. The sanctity of the church was absolute. To desecrate something so meaningful, so beautiful, filled people with rage. They demanded the sheriff find who did it. Witnesses were urged to come forward. The tension in town became unbearable. People turned on each other, accusations flying, old grudges surfacing. A town meeting descended into a shouting match. The culprit had left something behind. A mask made of sackcloth with a crude smiley face stitched onto the front. Find the owner of the mask, everyone said, and you'd found your perpetrator. But the sheriff never located the owner, because the person who left the mask at the scene wasn't the person who owned it. I didn't learn the truth until the night before I was scheduled to leave Ashby. The boarding house phone rang late in the evening. It was Deputy Isaac, asking if I had time to talk. When I said he was welcome to come by, he told me the conversation needed to be conducted somewhere private. We arranged to meet after dark, a few miles down the road from town, not far from the entrance to the burned remains of Holler. I thought I was in for an emotional goodbye. Isaac didn't want to cry in front of anyone, I figured. He wanted privacy for his grief. I was partially right. There were tears. There was a goodbye. But Deputy Isaac also had a story to tell me, a story so devastating that I still think about it almost every single day, even decades later. I drove to the meeting spot after dark and waited. Isaac emerged from the shadows carrying a bottle of liquor. Even from a distance, I could tell he was drunk from the way he walked, unsteady, loose, dangerous. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't frightened of him that night. After some awkward pleasantries, I asked what he wanted to discuss. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a long pull from the bottle, gathering his thoughts. "Can I make a confession to you?" he finally asked. "As a pastor?" I explained that Presbyterian confession didn't work quite that way. That if he wanted to confess, he should do so directly to God. "A one-on-one with God won't cut it," Isaac said. Not right now. I need to talk to someone man to man, not man to God. I told him I understood. I asked what he wanted to confess. But before he would speak, Isaac extracted a promise from me. I was leaving in the morning, he said. Did I ever plan to come back? Hopefully, I said. Push that idea right out of your mind, Isaac said. His voice was hard, cold, utterly serious. I'm about to tell you something that no one can ever know. Once you hear it, you can never come back here, never. If you don't promise me that, I won't say another word. I promised. How could I not? The man was clearly desperate to unburden himself. Isaac told me that a few days before the fire in Godby Holler, he'd run into an old co-worker in the next county over. This former colleague now worked for the Russell County Sheriff's Department. They got to talking, and the colleague mentioned a recent case. He'd arrested a teenage prostitute for solicitation. While transporting her, the girl started talking about an assault she had experienced. At first, the deputy thought she was making it up, trying to garner sympathy, maybe earn some time out of her cell with coffee and a cigarette. But as she talked, he realized her story was real. She said a client had picked her up, driven her somewhere remote, and offered her a beer. They'd discussed terms. That was the last thing she remembered clearly. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in the woods, bruised and aching, with no memory of what had happened in between. She'd been drugged with something powerful, something that caused unconsciousness, memory loss, and hallucinations. Because she remembered being taken to a haunted house by masked men, and she remembered that as they dragged her out afterward, the leaves on the trees turned into underpants right before her eyes.
Isaac's colleague wanted to know what kind of drug could cause those effects. Isaac suggested rohypnol, roofies, among other possibilities. But as he drove back toward Ashby, Isaac's mind kept circling back to one detail: the leaves turning into underpants. He'd heard that exact image before, recently. Then it clicked. Little Joshua had told me about underpants trees. I'd mentioned it to Isaac in passing when I first called to report my concerns about the boy. The image was so bizarre, so specific, that it stuck in both our minds. What were the odds that two people with no apparent connection would describe the exact same hallucination? And the girl had mentioned being taken to a haunted house. There was only one haunted location near Ashby, Godby Holler, with its plague town ruins. Isaac decided to check it out. He drove to Godby Holler and parked his truck at the edge of the overgrown wilderness. The vegetation was so thick that even a vehicle couldn't push through. So Isaac grabbed his flashlight and his pistol and walked into the haunted holler after dark. Thorny vines tore at his legs. Poison ivy and gypsum pods left his skin burning, but he found the half-burned plague town easily enough. He didn't find any underpants trees there, so he kept searching, looping around to cover the entire holler. And finally, tucked into a shadowy corner, he found a clearing ringed by dogwood trees. The trees weren't decorated with the white flowers dogwoods are known for. When Isaac shone his flashlight up into the branches, he saw dozens of pairs of underwear hanging there like grotesque ornaments. Different sizes, different colors, all of them trophies. In that moment, Isaac understood everything. If the teenage girl's assault was real, if she hadn't hallucinated the underpants trees or the masked men who looked like make-do dolls, then neither had little Joshua. And if those pairs of underwear were trophies, the number of victims had to be in the high double digits. How long had this been going on? Who were the men behind the masks, and how had it taken this long for anyone to discover the truth?
Isaac walked back to his truck. He grabbed the spare gas can he kept in the bed. He knew it was wrong to burn evidence. He knew it could jeopardize any future prosecution, but Isaac didn't care about prosecution anymore. He wanted the men behind those masks to know their crimes had been discovered. He wanted to see who would panic. He soaked the dogwood trees in gasoline, set them on fire, and watched them burn. The next morning, the fire was the talk of the town. Isaac played his part, acting surprised, asking people, "Did you hear about the fire in Godby Holler?" Everyone reacted with innocent surprise. Everyone except his brother. The brother suddenly had a bus to catch, needed to leave town immediately, very urgent business elsewhere. Isaac found this coincidental, suspicious, so he drove to his brother's trailer to look around. In the back of a filthy closet, hidden in a garbage bag, Isaac found a sackcloth mask with a smiley face stitched onto the front. That night, Isaac's brother came home to a dark trailer. He didn't realize anyone was waiting for him until he opened the closet and found his brother sitting there in the shadows. Isaac said he had to torture him to get the full story. The law didn't scare him. Even a gun to his head didn't scare him, but pain made him talk. Isaac stuffed his brother's mouth with a wet rag and beat him. When he broke the first finger, his brother started confessing. He, the logger, and the trucker had been selecting victims for almost a decade. They didn't do it often, just occasionally, when the brother needed money badly enough to lure a child into the woods with soda laced with sedatives. But the brother had gotten sloppy. He'd gotten so accustomed to dosing children that he miscalculated when drugging the teenage prostitute. He'd given her too much, and she'd retained partial memories. And through sheer chance, that mistake had circled back to him in a way he never could have predicted. Having learned that his own brother was the linchpin in a decade-long predator ring, Isaac had a decision to make. He untied his brother from the chair. He popped open a couple of beers. He told his brother he'd fix everything. All the brother needed to do was call his two accomplices and arrange a meeting so Isaac could figure out how to smooth things over. The brother was so grateful he wept. He made the call immediately, eager to cooperate, desperate to escape consequences. Once he'd relayed the time and location, Isaac grabbed him by the throat and strangled him to death. Later that night, Isaac drove to the meeting spot and waited for the trucker and the logger. When they arrived, they didn't find the brother waiting for them. They found judgment. Isaac shot them both. He loaded all three bodies into his truck, drove to an abandoned mine shaft a few counties away, and dumped them into the darkness. At first, Isaac felt certain he'd done the right thing. The legal system was full of cracks, and monsters slipped through those cracks all the time. He couldn't let that happen, not after a full confession, not knowing what these men had done to children. He didn't regret killing the logger or the trucker, but the look in his brother's eyes when he realized what was happening, that haunted Isaac. The moment when his brother understood that his own flesh and blood was going to kill him. Isaac remembered the story of Cain and Abel. He remembered Cain's question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" He began to wonder if he should have helped his brother differently, not by covering up his crimes, but by arresting him, protecting him from himself. And that's when Isaac asked me, in my humble opinion as a man of God, whether someone who'd murdered his own brother could enter heaven. I told him he'd have to make a very good case before the Lord. The commandment was clear, "Thou shalt not kill." But I also said that if everything he'd told me was true, if he genuinely killed to protect the innocent from the power of evil, then perhaps certain provisions might be made. Isaac said the only reason he was telling me any of this was because the people of Ashby couldn't handle the truth. The missing men had been pillars of the community. If the truth came out, it would destroy Ashby. If it went to trial, the same thing would happen. So the only question that remained was whether he could live with the memory of killing his own flesh and blood. I still think about Deputy Isaac and his brother, even all these years later. I wish I'd shared with him a verse from Chronicles. If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land.
But I also wish I'd shared a verse from Ezekiel. So I will tear down the wall which you plastered over with whitewash, and bring it down to the ground so that its foundation is laid bare, and when it falls, you will be consumed in its midst, and you will know that I am the Lord. It's a verse about the consequences of concealing evil, about how when we expose wickedness and allow it to be consumed, we become instruments of divine justice. Because in this life or the next, there are consequences for those who harm the innocent. I believe that deeply enough to stake my immortal soul on it. So peace be upon you, Deputy Isaac. Wherever you are, you're still in my prayers.